Okay, so today we're doing the Henry reaction, and we're going to start by weighing out our two solid ingredients, the ammonium acetate and the 3,4-dimethoxybenzaldehyde. We're going to weigh about 3.23 grams of benzaldehyde, then put it into the round bottom flask. Then we're going to weigh out the ammonium acetate. You have to be a little bit careful when you're weighing out the ammonium acetate, just to keep the lid on it at all times, because it is deliquescent, meaning it will absorb water out of the atmosphere and just turn into a puddle of liquid. And that water will A, throw your weight off, and B, not improve your reaction. So just keep the lid on the container when you're not actually taking material out of it. And as soon as you're done, put it into the flask. You don't need to panic about it, but you just don't want to leave the container open because it'll turn liquid. Okay, once we have that done, then we're going to measure out our liquid ingredients. So we're going to put out 5 ml of acetic acid. It's concentrated acetic acid or glacial acetic acid. And of course, you don't want to smell that. It smells like vinegar, only it's much more concentrated, so it'll burn your nose. Be a little bit careful when you're pouring it that you don't spill it on the bench. If you need a funnel, that's okay too, but it should be possible to pour into the measuring cylinder without spilling everywhere. So measure out the 5 ml and then add that into the round bottom flask. And then we're going to do the same with the nitromethane. So the nitromethane, we need approximately 1.2 ml. It's going to be in excess. So if we add in 1.4 ml, you are wasting extra nitromethane, but it's not going to limit how far our reaction goes. So you're better off erring on the side of adding a little bit more rather than a little bit less. This time we have a dropper, which is going to make things a lot easier. So approximately 1.2, a little bit over 1.2 ml, and then we're going to add that into the flask. Now we're going to set it up with the reflux condenser. So water goes in the bottom out the top, in goes the reflux condenser, and then we can lower it down against the edge of the heating mantle and we can start to heat it up. So once we're happy that the water is flowing and that the flask is set against one side of the isomantle, then we're just going to turn it on and we're going to wait for it to dissolve, and we're going to heat it at reflux for about 30 minutes. So there's no need to stir this. The agitation, the boiling will keep it going itself. And you can see here I've done a time lapse, and you can see that the material first starts to dissolve and melt, and then after about 30 minutes of reflux, it's gone from being almost clear or a lightly yellow colored solution, and it becomes darker and darker and darker until eventually it takes on a very dark brownish yellow kind of color. So we'll just let that boil away for a few minutes. And while it's boiling away, what we want to do is just get everything else set up. So for the next step, we're going to need a conical flask and a retort stand, Buchner funnel, Buchner flask, vacuum tubing, and just want to get those set up. We've got about 30 minutes to get everything in order, so we may as well use that time. The other thing that we might do in that time is look at the mechanism for the Henry reaction. So you can see there it's becoming a much deeper, darker color, and that's the formation of the nitrostyrene final product. And that's going to give us a clue about what we have to think about next, is that our nitrostyrene product is a very deeply colored product, and anything you get it on, it will contaminate. So we just have to be a little bit careful. At this stage, we've turned off the heat. We're going to let it slow down and stop boiling. And when it has stopped boiling, then we can transfer it into the flask of water. So since we have it clamped, we can actually just lift it straight out of the isomantle. Be a little bit careful when you're doing this that it's not unbalanced, because the plastic or the rubber tubing isn't going to pull it over. You definitely don't want this to spill. And then once it's cooled down, we're going to pour it promptly into our waiting ice and water. About 20 grams of ice in 80 ml of water. You'll see here from another angle that I do it carefully but promptly. I don't actually hold the flask because we want the flask to not be boiling, but it still has to be hot. Because what you'll notice is if you leave it too long, it'll all solidify in the flask and then you won't be able to get it out of the flask. The other thing is that you want to stir or agitate the water as you're putting that in. So you can either use a glass rod or just rotate the flask slightly with your hand. That'll just stop it clumping up completely. Although really it's not too bad either way. Once we've done that, then we'll just clamp that out of the way. Again, that yellow material will stain anything it gets on, so just make sure it's securely clamped. And then we're just going to take the glass rod and break up any lumps until we have a nice fine powder. So you're just going to mash, 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 stir, 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 and then we'll have a nice fine powder. And it's worth just making sure that it's as best you can not sticking to the sides anymore or anything like that, and then you'll be able to filter it out in the end. So once we've done that, I've let it settle here, mostly just to demonstrate that it is a fine powder suspended in water. It's not soluble at all. And so you see when I finish stirring it here, it starts to settle. And this is very much sped up, but you can see it's all accumulated at the bottom. So we have our set up Buchner funnel connected to the vacuum line. So we don't want to leave material in the bottom of the flask. So give it a quick stir before we transfer it into the Buchner funnel. And you have to be a little bit careful here. So pour it. This is a stage that you definitely don't want to spill the material at. And you see it's under vacuum and the water starts getting pulled through, and the water only has a slight yellow color, and the majority of the material, the vast majority of the material, which is not soluble, will remain on the filter paper. So let that filter. Again, we want to wash everything carefully. So wash down your glass rod to make sure that there's no yellow material on it before you put it down on the bench. Clean out your flask, and then we can turn the vacuum off and we can remove the tube from the vacuum, and then we can start to transfer our material. And you can see here when I go scraping it that it looks like it's nice flowy powder, but it's actually a gloopy solid. So you got to be a little bit careful because it'll stick to anything that you let it stick to. So you see the way it's forming a blob there, that'll stick to the sides of things. So turn your whey boat into a conical flask and then start to put the material in. And again, just push it off the sides. So see, you can see the way I have it building up on the sides of the flask here. Just try and make sure that you don't get it on the outside of the flask or anywhere else. Once we have that done, then we're going to rinse out the final little bit with some acetone, and then we'll be able to recrystallize it from that acetone. So use the minimum amount of acetone necessary in order to just get rid of the material out of the Buchner flask and down off the sides of your conical flask. And I'm going to leave this video here, and we'll get on to doing the recrystallization in the lab. This first part should take you about an hour or an hour and 15 minutes tops. Alright, that's all for now. If you have any questions, post them below, or I'll see you in the lab and you can ask me there. Bye.